Most roofing businesses are started with the same dream in mind. They want to make a lot of money. They want the freedom to kind of live life on their terms, and they want to build a vision so big that their team's dreams can fit inside. But it's funny because what we ultimately end up with is typically wildly different. We end up working 60, 70-hour weeks, wearing all the hats, putting out the fires from our customers, our employees, the cash flow issues, and just wondering, where the hell did the business go that was supposed to be pouring into my life? Instead, you're left with a business that's like sucking the life out of you. And after building my own roofing company, Jag Roofing and Sheet Metal, selling it in the merger, and working with over 250 roofing companies just over the last 3 or 4 years, I've started to see the pattern, and it's really clear as to why most roofing companies actually the owners are never able to build the life that they actually set out to do, and the reason they started their business in the first place. Really quick, let me show you the 3 stages that every roofer goes through and how to get past the part where 90% of roofers actually get stuck. Stage 1 is what I call the launch phase, and it's really exciting, but it's also kind of scary. It's gritty, it's messy, like you're just trying to make things happen, but it's typically you, maybe a helper, a truck, and a ladder, right? And it's painful because you're just getting started, you're just learning about business, and you're really just trying to prove that you can sell a roof to somebody outside of your mom or maybe your college roommate. Lots of trial and error. Mostly error, but a little bit of trial. It's painful, but you know you're doing it for you, you're building something for your family, and it's something that you can put your name on. Then comes stage 2. This is what I call the growth zone. So the business is starting to make money and you're hiring people, but everything's still running through you. You're the sales guy, you're the sales manager, you're the production manager, the office manager, and problems come up, but you can solve them quickly and you can put out the fires fast because everything gets that special founder's touch. But here's the problem with the founder's touch is it doesn't scale because there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so much of you to go around. And then comes kind of the land in between. And this is what I call the swamp. But it's like every time you add another person, you buy another truck, you get a fancier CRM, or you move into a bigger office, it's like every step forward is just an added layer of complexity. And the business does start to get bigger, but it also gets heavier. And the founder's touch can't reach everything because you can't be everywhere. And this is when you enter what I call phase 3, the constraint phase. The constraint phase is kind of ironic because it's like that's where most roofing companies find me and my company, commercialroofer.com. But it's like most of those companies have already found success. Their sales are up or their revenue's up, but they're just making less and less money every year because their profits are going down. And so I typically say they're more stuck now or feeling more stuck now than they did even in the beginning when they were carrying it on their own because they just don't know how to handle things at that next level. And so as a reminder, we've actually been through the launch zone, we've been through the growth zone, and now we're kind of at what I call the constraint zone. And in the constraint zone, we're kind of at a fork in the road. And we have 3 main options. We can, number 1, do nothing, right? And just kind of continue on that path we're on. But the funny thing about doing nothing is that you're actually choosing to do something. And if I know anything about flat lines or plateaus, it's that eventually gravity and inertia kind of kick in and that flat line starts to decline. Option 2 is that we can do what I call retreat. And when we retreat, sometimes it makes strategic sense to actually do so, to get rid of the trucks, get rid of the offices, get rid of the team. But a lot of times retreat is actually hiding something else, something a little bit deeper. And so I read a book one time called The Big Leap, and it talks about something called our upper limit. And so the upper limit basically says that when we as humans, reach a threshold outside of our comfort zone of success in love, success with our wealth, our relationships, anything outside of our comfort zone, we self-sabotage to bring ourselves back in to that comfort zone. And I see this with roofing company owners all the time. And when I see the roofing companies or roofing owners that I work with do this, I see them fire the team, get rid of the trucks, go back to operating in a lean way. And they tell themselves, that like, this is a better way. But the reality is that they're lying to themselves. It's not the better way. It's just the best way that they can protect their ego. You're just afraid. You're just craving that control again to put yourself back into the comfort zone. This isn't anything new though. Like even the Bible talks about it when like the Israelites left Egypt, right? They left Egypt. They had freedom. They had this whole brand new life, but they still wanted to go back because it's better the devil, But we all do it, right? Whether it's the Bible talking about it or Buddhism or Hinduism talking about it in the Samsaras, or even, the greatest philosophers, Aurelius, Socrates, they all have teachings around this. Because success creates fear, and we're always going to crash the plane to go back to the identity that we feel comfortable with. Which brings us to option 3. So option 3 is where you like evolve, okay? And you recognize the upper limit, you recognize the patterns in yourself, and you actually move into what I call the scalable zone. So everything I talked about at the very beginning of this video, what you started your business for, the money, the time, the freedom, all of those things are on the other side of the scalable zone, but it actually requires a new version of you. You can't bulldoze your way through this one. You can't hustle and grind your way through it. It requires something totally different. In 2022, I spent over 16 days in Mount Everest in Nepal with my brother, and I learned something about business. In business, we have mountains, and in those mountains, we have what's getting us to the top of the mountain, okay? So in the beginning, we have hustle, we have grit, we have all the awesome words that help us bulldoze our way through the mountain, right? It helps us get to the peak. But what's interesting is that there's always a taller mountain, right? And so if you guys remember earlier, I showed you the options where, we're in the startup phase, we're in the growth phase, we're in the constraint phase. But what I've learned is that the constraint phase typically isn't just a plateau, it's actually a bridge to the next mountain. And if the first mountain is actually climbed with hustle and grit and grind and everyone's favorite words, then the second mountain is actually systems, processes, structures, probably not as sexy of words, but they're all these amorphous terms like scaling your business, systemizing your business, optimizing your business. Actually, all of these words that I have here behind me that people tend to throw around, but I actually put meaning to them. So let me show you how I actually systemize a business, how I optimize those systems, and how I actually scale commercial roofing businesses all over the country. So the way I see it, nothing really matters until we actually have the plan. And so most roofing companies, they operate on default rather than by design. And so what I really encourage the guys that we work with and the women that we work with to do is to actually go deep and figure out, like, what do you want? And I don't just mean it like a surface level, but like, what do you actually want? What is the lifestyle that you want to, what is the lifestyle that you're after, that you started your roofing company for? What do you want to give to your family or the people that you actually care about in your life? And I typically start with, like, what does that look like? And then how much money do we need to make in order to live that lifestyle? Now, there's a lot of business coaches or coaching programs that talk about creating big 10-year plans or even BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. But to me, it's like a lot of times that feels like entrepreneurial arts and crafts, right? It feels like we're just talking about the fluff. And so what I like to do is I like to start with 3 years. Pretty easy to imagine your life and what it'll be like 3 years from now. How old will your kids be? How old will you be? How old will your wife be? And it's pretty easy to understand what 3 years down the road actually looks like. And then pretty easily, we can distill that down. We can reverse engineer to 12 quarters back to say, if that's true 3 years from now, if that's true 12 quarters from now, what has to be true this quarter? Now, the next big amorphous term that kind of gets thrown around is systemize. And so when I think about creating systems in the business, I think about having process. I think about having playbooks. I also think about having people structure. And in the simplest way possible, what this means is that we know the process so we can tell people and show people what we do. We have the playbooks to show them exactly how we do it. And then we have the people structure to say who does each stage of that process, right? What do we do? How do we do it? And who does it? Now, once we have our systems dialed, right? The what we do, the how we do it, and who does it, we can work on the optimization piece. Optimization is really just taking our systems and constantly refining them to make them better. So we have to track our performance. And the way that I track performance is basically by setting up a scorecard for every division of the business. A scorecard that tracks the necessary numbers for marketing. A scorecard that tracks the necessary numbers for sales and production and our internal operations. And so when we have a plan, so we know where we're going, we know what we do, how we do it, and who does what, and we're measuring it, the only other thing to do is to bring all of this together in what I call the pulse. So the pulse to me is essentially exactly what it sounds like. It's the heartbeat of what we do. So it's like all of these things that we've discussed on this chart, it's like those are great tools. But if we don't have a way to keep them in rhythm and to keep them in front of us by getting together every 90 days to check in on the plan, getting together at the end of the month to review the previous month and preview the next month, and then to have vector points where we're checking in on a weekly basis, then all of this falls apart. But if we can keep all of those things in front of us, we can keep the scorecards in front of us, then we're always letting people know if what we're doing, how we're doing it, and who's doing it is doing it at a level at which we're happy with. If you guys enjoyed anything I talked about in this video, or even were able to visualize yourself somewhere in that roofer's journey that I described, or have questions around the process that I broke down for building systems in your business, I've got a link in the description. Click the link, send me a message. I'd love to chat. Anything roofing, anything business. I'm a complete nerd for this industry. I look forward to chatting with you guys there.